minister had just finished a revival in huge Midwestern states. And as he boarded the train for his long journey home, he looked about and found him a seat, and he sat down beside a young man. And as the trip progressed, he noticed the young man never give him a response. He'd try to talk to him about the weather, first one thing another. The young man never said a word to him. And the silence just got to the preacher. And just a little bit, he turned to the boy and he said, "Son," he said, "I'm a preacher. I'm a minister. If you got problems, I'd love to help you if I could." And in just a moment, the little boy, young man, turned to the preacher. And with tears in his eyes, he proceeded to tell him his story. He said, "Preacher, I've not lived a good life. To tell you the truth, I'm not proud of my life at all." He said, "I had a good mother and a daddy that tried their best to raise me right. Took me to church. My mother read them Bible stories to me. They raised me as good as they could. But as I become a teenager and a young man, I rebelled. I just wouldn't listen to what my mother and daddy tried to tell me. Preacher, I got so bad that one day I physically hit my daddy with my own hand. Preacher, my dad come to me and he said, 'Son, you're going to have to leave home.' He said, 'Son, you're breaking your mama's heart.' And so I've traveled all over this country. I've done everything you can imagine. But preacher, just a couple weeks ago, I found myself in a little church. And in a revival meeting, God saved my soul. I wrote my mother a letter. And I said, 'Mama, I want to come home. I want to see you and Daddy. I don't want to apologize for the way I done you when I was growing up.' So I was coming home. The preacher smiled. He said, 'Son, that's well and good. I'm proud for you.' He said, 'But how do you know your mom and daddy's even living? And if they are, how do you know that they want you to come home?' He looked over and he said, 'Sir, I don't know.' He said, 'But I wrote my mother a letter.' And I said, 'Mom, if you and Dad can find it in your heart to forgive me the way I've done you.' Preacher, we lived beside this railroad track all of our lives. Had a little white house, and out behind it there's an apple tree. I asked my mom if she could find it in her heart to forgive me. Just put one of her little handkerchiefs out there on one of them limbs of that apple tree. And I know that her and Daddy found it in their heart to forgive me. He said, 'Preacher, we're almost to the house. It's just around the next curve up there, and I'm just scared to death to look.' He said, 'I want to go home so bad.' He said, 'Preacher, would you do me a favor?' He said, 'Would you look out that window? It'll be a little white house, and there'll be an apple tree down there beside the railroad track. Would you find me a little piece of cloth? Find me a little apron, just something hanging that tree that says my mama had me home.' That preacher said, 'Son, I sure will.' Story goes, he took his little handkerchief out, and he climbed over that boy and got beside that window. He leaned down there and wiped that window and pushed that curtain back. And he looked with anticipation. In just a moment, here come that little white house. And in just a moment, big smile come over that preacher's face. He looked down at that boy and he said, son, you don't have any problems. He said, that apple tree's in full bloom. He said, there's rags from the top to the bottom. He said, but that ain't all. He said, under that apple tree, I see a little gray-headed daddy. And I see a little gray-headed mama and said, son, they got a bed sheet. And they're waving that thing. And they're saying, son, come on home. Come on home. All's forgiven. We want you to come home and be with us again. And as we do this song so many times, you stop here and think, what do you say? What do you say? That's just like God. There's not a person in here just like me and just like you. We've all been saved. We've all walked away from God. I thought this morning what I say. In 1978, my daddy who they say today has dementia, who they say today sometimes not in his right mind. But in 1978, he stood in a pulpit at Pine Ridge Church, and he told his backslidden son and his backslidden daughter-in-law they need to come on home. And in 1978, Kathy and I rededicated our lives to the Lord. And in 1979, God gave us a little girl. I ain't never lived a good life, but I promised God that I'd do what He had me to do. That Sunday morning after I went home, Kathy went back bedroom and I went to the refrigerator. And shamefully, I'm saying, I went in there and I got the beer that's in our refrigerator. And I poured it down that sink that Sunday morning. 1 year later, God gave us a little girl. 10 years later, on April the 20th, 1989, my brother's birthday, I saw Christy walk to an altar. God saved her soul. You can ask my daughter, I ain't been the best daddy. I ain't been the best daddy, no people. But I know beyond a shadow of doubt that if I die today, both my girls have been saved. There's a man in this church right now, fine man. His brother died, had 3 boys. He took his brother's 3 boys and he took on them and he brought them to church. Seen that they're saved, seen that they're raising God. Folks, you don't have that promise that you got somebody left. If you die this morning, mother and daddy, and you die this day, do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you'll see your children in heaven? Kids, do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you'll see your mom and daddy when you get to heaven? You don't have the responsibility. You need to know that your mother and daddy is saved. You need to know that your kids have been saved. It's not no plaything. I love you all with everything. But we say to some people, oh, you've done a good job. But if you don't know that you've been saved, you can't come home. If you know what has been saved, can your children look at you and say, yes, my daddy's lived a good godly life. Yes, my mama's lived a good godly life. I can depend on what they say. It's time. I'm not a mean person. I'm not a bad person. But it's time we stop playing church. It ain't up to the Republicans, and it ain't up to the Democrats. We heard last night, we talked to our gay brothers and sisters. Gay people need to get saved. The Bible said it's an abomination unto God. We can't depend on, I'm going to tell you something. We can't depend on folks to go get our lost and saved. You ask somebody that's saved, how many people have witnessed to them lately? We're not going out. Somebody's got to go and win our lost ones to Jesus. We sang this song. It's too important. It's too tragic. We're just rocking along, hoping somebody else will tell them about the Lord when it's our duty, it's our responsibility. Thank you so much.